Week 14, there's no crying in fantasy. We are back. Sean, what's going on?
Man, nothing much. Week 14, uh, we're getting to playoff time for a lot of leagues. Maybe playoff times right now. Next week's my playoff time. I got a first round bye in one of my leagues, so it's about to get down to some business pretty shortly, and we got some starts and sits. I would say mine's pretty spicy. I don't know about
Uh-oh.
yours.
Yeah, I think mine's a little spicy too. I got a couple. I really don't. This is kind of a straightforward week to me. It's not a week that I feel like you need to deviate from the norm. Go with what's working. If you're on the borderline of like trying to get into the playoffs, I think you know what players are having success. If you have a shaky matchup, I mean, it just depends on the player, and I'll get into one in a second that I'm thinking about here.
Yeah, and we can get it started. And first, shortly, let's go back to last week. I know I said Brandon Ayuk would have a big game. I picked the wrong wide receiver as Debo Samuel, but I was a little bit onto something. But what else we had? AJ Brown did end up still going off.
Got into the end zone. Yep.
He sure did. I said he wouldn't, so I was wrong about that. But hey, that's why we're here to discuss these type of things.
Gardner
Um,
Minshew.
Gardner Minshew, man,
I told you about Minshew mania.
Minshew Mania, and we're gonna get into Gardner in a sec. We're gonna have a good discussion about that in a sec. I don't know if you want to go ahead and get your quarterback of the week start.
Yeah, let me go ahead and start with my quarterback, and that's going to be Russell Wilson for this
Whoa,
week. Um, I like the matchup. I think they're coming off a shaky game, but going against a team that is bottom five, bottom six in pass defense against the Chargers. I think that this is the perfect recipe for the Broncos to have success. And I feel like if you're in a position like I am, where I lost Trevor Lawrence this week in two leagues, I need a quarterback. Russell Wilson going against the Chargers. I'll take that matchup all day. Like I said, Chargers defense is one of the worst in the league when it comes to pass defense, and I think this is a matchup that they can exploit. If you go back weeks before last week, Russell Wilson had, I believe, 24 before the bye against Kansas City, 25 against Buffalo after the bye, 19 against Minnesota, and then 20 against Cleveland. And then he also had 20 points last week against Houston. It just was a little bit of an ugly game.
right, and Russell Wilson going up against the Chargers. I think that might be a lopsided game just because Chargers have been struggling on both sides of the balls now. So I mean, you might see where Russell Wilson does go off in this game. The only concern I would have if Denver was to get up early, maybe they'll start running the ball, run the clock out. Um, so that would be my own concern, but I do like that start. And Russell's been on fire, honestly. So I mean, he has finally found his groove with Sean Payton, and I don't think that's a bad start at all.
Yeah. How about
Um,
you?
so to go ahead and get this thing started, man. Um, my start and sit, I already mentioned it to you earlier this week. Uh, I'm starting Gardner Minshew this week, man.
Okay, back
That's
to
who
back weeks.
did I pick Gardner Minshew? Well, you picked
I
Gardner
picked him
Minshew.
last week. Yeah.
You picked him. So yeah, back to back weeks. I like what I saw from the man last week. Um, first is Tennessee. He was 26 completion out of 42 attempts, 312 yards, and two TDs. That game went into overtime. That was a good game. If you look at it, Cincinnati's defense completion percentage in the last three games, they have been second of giving up the most completion percentage at 72%. And then you also look at the yards Cincinnati's given up per game in their last three games. They ranked third, giving up 273 yards a game. So, I mean, but Cincinnati only gives up one passing touchdown per game in the last three. So, I mean, that might be the underlier there, but I think Minshew can go for at least another 2 touchdown game. And I think he's the start of the week. I think it's going to be a good game in general.
Wow. Start
You
of the
got
week?
at quarterback.
Oh, okay.
At quarterback. But yeah, I like Gardner Minshew a lot. In fact, in one of my leagues, I'm starting him over Patrick Mahomes, which I'll
Wow.
get into that a little bit more in my
That's
sit.
that's a stretch. Wow. Okay.
I know.
I'm just gonna say I like the pick. I told you about Garner last week. I think he finds success this week again. Like you said, Cincinnati's defense is kind of middle of the road when it comes to pass defense, but Garner finds a way to get his guys the ball and allow them to make plays. And you saw that last week going against Tennessee. And you saw Trevor Lawrence have success against Cincinnati's defense as well. I mean, they came out with like a 30-yard play to Christian Kirk. And, get well, Christian Kirk, please.
Yep.
But you saw him come out and just start throwing out of the gate. So I think for a team like Indy, you're down Jonathan Taylor. Yes, you have Zach Moss, but you can get Zach Moss involved in the pass game. I think they just exposed that secondary. So yeah, I like the pick.
Yeah, and I was a little early on Zach Moss. This would be the week to put him at running back for start of the week, but I didn't do it. Because I didn't want to, say the same players back to back. But yeah, I like Gardner a lot, and I think he's going to be miles better than Jake Browning on the other side, who had a good game last week.
Had a great game.
Great game, but you're playing against a Indianapolis Colts defense. I think Jake Brown is not going to have the same success he had last week. So I think it's going to be another lopsided game. We're talking Denver Chargers, thinking that Denver might, be a lopsided as well. So I think this is another lopsided game. Pittman's I think he's going to have another good game. Alec Pierce is a sleeper there. He's finally catching on. So, hey, I like Gardner a lot.
I don't mind Jake Browning this week.
You don't mind him, really?
No, I'm just going to put that out there. I look at what he did last week. I think he has one of the highest completion percentages over the last 3 weeks as well. And you got to factor in his targets of who is catching the ball for him as well. He has Jamar Chase. T. Higgins is coming back. He's working himself back. You still got Tyler Boyd. You got Joe Mixon out of the backfield. Like, they have success throwing the ball, and you can see it even with Jake Browning that they're going to be pushing the ball down the field. So I don't mind him going up against Indy. The Indy matchup doesn't really scare me. And he's the type of quarterback, like one of those backups that comes out and like doesn't have a lot of fear. Like you see in some backups, like they have some fear when they come onto the field. He doesn't have any fear. Like he's like, I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to let it fly. So I like that about him. I think if you need a backup for the rest of the season, it's not a bad option just because of who he's throwing the ball to. They're going to throw the ball and they're going to catch the ball. So
let's just say this: if Jake Browning does well against the Colts and he puts up 18 points in fantasy PPR, I think he's definitely a reliable option going forward. So that's somebody to keep an eye on. And like you said, Chase, I think it all falls on Chase. What kind of game Chase is going to have. If Chase has a big game, then Jake Browning's going to have a big game. It's kind of like Tua and Tyreek Hill. If Tyreek Hill is having a big game, Tua's having a big game. So, and Tua was one of my start of the weeks last week. So, Jake Browning, definitely keep an eye on him.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and get into the quarterback sits of the week. Who's your sit at quarterback?
I'm going with Geno this week.
Geno.
Yeah, I know Geno had a great game last week against Dallas. I don't like the matchup going against San Francisco on the road. San Francisco seems to be finding their mojo. They are right now against quarterbacks. They are a bottom 5 or top 5 defense against quarterbacks in fantasy. So you do not see them give up a lot of points to fantasy quarterbacks. I, Gino's going to throw the ball. He's going to throw it to DK. He's going to get it to Metcalf. You also have Kenneth Walker coming back, but I just don't see them having a lot of success on the road against San Fran. It's a division game. It's going to be tough. I just think it's going to be more of like a grinded out game than them having a shootout like they did last week in Dallas.
Yeah, and San Francisco, a very hot team right now. I know they gave up some yardage to A.J. Brown. Jalen Hurts kind of had a solid game as well, on the ground and passing the ball.
Yep.
But, Gino, I think it really depends on the run game. If Walker is healthy, and Charbonnet, he's also hurt as well. So they're going to be both pretty banged up. I think they're both going to be active and ready to go, but I think it depends on the run game. If they can get Walker and Charbonnet going, I think that would help them a lot. But then again, you're going against 49ers, who is, pretty solid against the run, maybe one of the better run defenses in the league. Their pass defense, obviously, 49ers early in the year struggled a little bit, but they have gotten better. The Eagles kind of export them just a tad bit. So I do like that sit, and I wouldn't be starting Geno Smith. So that's why I like it,
Yep. Who's your sit?
So I've already gave out hints. My sit's Patrick Mahomes, man. Patrick Mahomes is my sit because I'm doing it personally in my league. Going up against the Bills, who last 3 games, they have been number 1 in the least amount of passing yards per game at 153 yards per game in the last 3. And you're talking about a team that's desperate, the Bills. So the Bills are going to come out everything they got to hopefully make the playoffs. So, and the thing is, the Chiefs coming off a loss. Normally, Mahomes is money when he comes off a loss. He normally doesn't lose back-to-back. But I think this is a game where he will lose back-to-back. I like the Bills in this game. And I don't like Patrick Mahomes, which in my opinion, he's been the most consistent quarterback. But it's not like Patrick has been overly great this year, because I know that because I've had him all year. And honestly, that's why I'm starting Gardner Minshew over him. And I picked up Gardner off the waiver wire. I was like, you know what? I got the number 1, I got the number 2 seed in my league and got a first round bye. Why not? And I think it's going to, work off, because I think Gardner's going to get over 20 fantasy points. And I think you're going to have Mahomes, who his ceiling, I think, is going to be 18 points, 19 points, his ceiling. But I think he's going to be around, 12 to 15 points. And if you can get Gardner and you think he's going to have a good game, that point difference makes a hell of a lot more of a difference than what most people think, So 5 to 10 points more can win you a game to advance yourself into the fantasy playoffs if you're on the bubble. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going Gardner, and these type of moves, I understand is risky. When I told everybody, hey, I'm starting Gardner Minshew over Mahomes, everybody said, you're crazy. Well, it's just fantasy. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I got Mahomes sitting this week versus the Bills. Is it at the Bills or is that Chiefs?
It is at Kansas City.
Well, that is a tough environment, but Josh Allen likes to go head-to-head against Patrick Mahomes. We see how it goes. Like I said, I'm seeing Mahomes.
I don't like the sit. I understand it because the Chiefs just haven't looked good overall, but I'm not betting against Mahomes, especially down the stretch. I think that this is a game that it's going to be a shootout between Kansas City and Buffalo. Pacheco's injured. That takes away from the run game. I think they're going to rely on their pass game and getting those receivers out in the open field to be able to make plays. And I think you're going to see. I have Mahomes at probably like 25 points this week.
But the thing is, the one thing that really has put Mahomes down is his receivers. I mean, Kelsey, although I think he's still tied in one, right? I think he's still tied in one. He still hasn't looked like the Kelsey of old, even though he's still tied in one. I understand that, but Kelsey is not as like game changing like he used to be, if that makes sense. He's
Yeah.
still a factor in the game, but to carry the receiving for the Chiefs, he can't do it alone anymore. They should have never let Tyreek go, and I still think Pat is going to make the playoffs, obviously, and I still think they're going to be Super Bowl contenders at the end of the day because it's Patrick Mahomes. But from a fantasy outlook, you know, I like Gardner better than Mahomes, and I don't like Mahomes this week versus the Bills.
I understand it. I think differently. I think 25 points. The emergence of Rashid Rice in that offense has been a big help. I know last week they struggled, but they were also on the road against Green Bay in Lambeau. That's not easy. But I think you're going to see Jerick McKinnon, sleeper right there, get involved in the pass game as well. So I think this is a big game for Mahomes. He always gets up for this matchup against Buffalo as well. It's kind of like a kind of swept under the rug rivalry almost. It's like
It
you
is.
know them in Cincinnati as a rivalry, but
Right.
this one is like 1B for them as well. So I think this team gets up for this game, and you're going to see a lot of points on the board.
Do you like Clyde
No,
this week? No.
no.
So you're definitely picking McKinnon over Clyde.
I picked Clyde up in a league just in case the absence of Pacheco is extended. But
Right.
and McKinnon was already on somebody's roster, so I was like, why not? But I don't like Clyde. Like, if it's between McKinnon and Clyde, I would start McKinnon in PPR. If it's a standard league, you maybe flex
It
Clyde.
might be more even.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was about to say that if it's PPR, McKinnon's the guy, but if it's standard, then it's about even.
Yep.
But yeah, let's go get into running backs. Who's your start for running backs?
My start this week is Alexander Madison.
Oh, okay.
Going against Vegas. Vegas is bottom 10 against running backs this year. There's not much competition behind Madison as well, as we've seen. They've tried to, kind of slide Ty Chandler in there, and he just hasn't really done anything. So,
Nope.
I think that, this offense is going to be a lot better because you have Justin Jefferson coming back. That takes a lot of attention off your offensive line.
I'm happy for him to be back.
Yep, happy for him to be back. Welcome back, JJ. But I think it opens up the run game as well. And, going against Vegas, I do expect Minnesota to win this game. And anything can happen. It could be a much closer game than we even think. But I think that Minnesota has success on the ground running the ball. They get Madison involved. And you're just going to see him open up a little bit more than he has in the past. So that's my start. And, I could obviously pick, some easy starts, but I think this is one, like, if you're in need of a running back this week, like let's say Pacheco's out and you don't have anybody, maybe you have Aaron Jones and you're on the fence of starting Aaron Jones because you don't know about, if he's still injured. I think Alexander Madison is a good start this week.
Yeah, and the Vikings coming off a bye. They're still rolling with Josh Dobbs, but if Dobbs struggles, they might work in Nick Mullins. But I think Madison will at least get one touchdown in this game because he gets the goal line carries. He's the bigger back. He's the power back. So I think he at least gets one touchdown. Las Vegas averages about gives up about one rushing touchdown per game, and I think that will be Alexander Madison. And I think the yardage might not be there, but at least you got the touchdown. And then if I had to pick the over under, let's say PPR let's say 11 points, I would kind of pick the over on that for Alexander Madison.
Yeah, I like that. I think he can definitely get 10 plus in this game, plus maybe a couple of catches. So I think he works himself into maybe the 13, 14 range.
Right, and they're going to have to rely on the run game to improve the passing game, make it easier for Dobbs. So that makes a lot of sense. Um, so I could definitely see that start. And I went the easy route, and I think this is going to be the player of the week. I think he's going to be RB1 of the week, and I think it's pretty easy to me for this start. You're going to start him anyway, in my opinion, but Bijan Robinson, he's my start of the week, period.
Okay.
RB1. Uh, Tampa, they're going against Tampa, right? So that's a division game. It's going to be a pretty tight one, but I think, with Tampa's D giving up about almost 2 rushing touchdowns a game in the last 3 games, which is first in the league. Um, and they also give up 134 yards of rushing. That's what they did in the last 3, which is 10th in the league. And they also give up about 30 attempts, rushing attempts. So, I mean, and you look at what, Bijan was able to do against the Saints 2 weeks ago. I think it's going to be a very similar game. Uh, and last week against the Jets, they played a better defense, obviously. So, but he still produced with 53 yards on 18 attempts and 3 receptions for 26 yards. But against the Saints, he had 16 rushing attempts for 91 yards, a touchdown, and he also had a receiving touchdown and had 32 yards of receiving on 3 receptions. I think that game is going to be very similar to what he does against Tampa, maybe even better, because Atlanta's got a gun for it. They got a gun for the division,
Yeah.
and I think this is prime time Bijan Robinson area right here. So I think Bijan, I think he's, you know, I would almost say he might get close to 30 points.
Wow.
Yeah, I know that's big balling
Wow.
and all, but I think he's going to be pretty close. He got 27 points, fantasy points against the Saints. So I think he's going to be pretty similar. I think he's definitely going to be pretty similar.
It's a tough matchup.
It's a tough matchup because you know what's at stake. So it's kind of like what we were just talking about the Bills and the Chiefs.
I like
So
to start. He's a must start.
a
He
must
has to be
start.
in your lineup. 30 points, I think, is a stretch. I'm going with 20. I would say 20. Um, but
Well,
I
just my luck. Arthur Smith will pull like he did early in the year by not playing Bijan. Just my luck. He'll do that this week for no reason.
Tyler
Because
Algier. It's the Tyler Algier game.
yeah, just my luck. It'd be the Tyler Algier game, or make it worse. It'd be the Cordell Patterson game.
Right.
That'd be even worse. Uh, but yeah, I got Bijan Robinson. I think that's a no brainer. So
Okay. Um,
um,
going to my sit, I have on the opposite end of that game, Rashad White. I think Rashad White is a sit. Um,
almost picked him. Yep.
Atlanta's defense is stingy with the run. I mean, their defense is coming on as of late. They weren't that great in the beginning of the season, but they've been clicking lately.
They
Um,
have.
you see them getting a lot of stops, a lot of turnovers lately. So I just think it's going to be hard for Rashad White to get going. I think that this is a game that the Bucks are going to be throwing. They're going to be trying to get their yardage through the air. You may see Rashad White get involved in the pass game as he has been lately, but I just don't see the production being there against Atlanta. Like we said, it's going to be a tough division game, and it's going to be hard to get momentum. So I'm on the other side of this game with sitting Rashad White.
Yeah, I almost picked Rashard White, but it's always that receiving factor from White that makes me not sit him. The receiving aspect of it, he gets me every time with that because it's just like, you know, he won't have a good game rushing the ball, that's for sure. Uh, but he'll sneak up on you because he might get 4 to 8 receptions, and that's the deal with him. And at PPR, that's gold, and that's why he's RB5 this season right now.
Yep.
which is crazy. I should have never traded him. That's a mistake. I traded him and Brian Robinson. But yeah, I like to sit for sure, and I almost picked him. I almost went the same route as you. But this sit, might be a little extreme what I'm about to say here, and
Uh,
I don't, I don't know if you actually sit him. It's just I'm just predicting that he might not have a good fantasy product production against the Tennessee Titans, and I'm picking Raheem Morris. Well, not Morris, Raheem Mostert. Tennessee, they're one of the better run defenses in the league. Uh, you seen what they did against Sack Moss last week. I thought Sack Moss would have still produce but he didn't produce that much against Tennessee at all. So I wouldn't say at all, but just not the game that I expected. And I think it's going to be the same for Raheem Mostert. Not to mention that, I think a lot of the fantasy points is going to go to Tyreek Hill and the receiving core they have with Jalen Waddle. And I don't think it's going to be a blowout. And so I don't think it's going to be a blowout like Miami did against Washington last week. I think it might not be close, but I don't think it's going to get to the point where the Dolphins are just going to run the ball to run the clock out. And I think Raheem is not going to have that great of a fantasy output this week, so he's my sit for this week. And I know what Tennessee just fired their defensive coordinator. Didn't they just do that?
yeah.
And I know that's a factor, but you never know. That might be a upside because normally when teams fire either a head coach or coordinator, for some reason the game right after that they do really well. For some reason, maybe not a couple games after, but normally after the game right after they fired a coordinator or head coach, some teams just feel like they need to finally win, But yeah, Raheem Mostert is going to be my sit for running
So
backs this week.
let me ask you a question. Would you sit A Chain then?
No, I would honestly start A Chain because he's more of a touchdown guy. I think he's going to get some touchdowns. It's just from a yardage standpoint. I don't think it's going to be there. I don't think the rushing attempts is going to be there for Mustard. I would start A Chain over Mustard. Just from a touchdown perspective. He A-Chain just has a nose for the end zone, no matter where he is on the field. He's, red zone or not. And
So over under 10 points for Moster in PPR.
oh damn. What has he been averaging? It has to be like 15 or something of that nature, right?
More than likely north of 15. He's been in double digits almost every week except for 2.
Let's just go with the under just to support my argument here. He might get 10. He might get double digits, but I don't think it's just like Mahomes. I mean, I think Mahomes is going to get in between 13 to 15 points. I think that's automatic. It's just like he's not going to get his usual 15 or more, if that makes sense. I think it's going to be a down game. And, it's funny because a down game for Raheem is, could be a good game for Alexander Madison. You know what I'm saying? So, that's the perspective I have with that. But you never know. This might be his first single-digit fantasy output this year, or second, or whatever.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you here. I do think it's going to be a blowout, though.
You do think it's gonna be blowout.
I think it's going to be a blowout. But if I had to pick between Mostert and A Chain, I would pick A Chain.
Yeah, I'm looking on Fantasy Pros right now, and they have A Chain over Raheem. So they're thinking A Chain is going to have the better game. He's projected 12.8. What is Raheem projected? Raheem's projected 11. So I mean, I'm guessing they're and he's questionable. So It does
He's
show that
playing.
he's questionable.
He's playing.
He's playing?
Yeah. So
So,
he'll just said Titan secondary is so trash. I can see somebody being disappointed in Mostert's performance. I agree.
yeah, I mean, the
If
thing
you're
is,
if you're expecting 15 plus from Mostert in this game, I think you're going to be disappointed.
because it shows right here he only played 38% of his snaps with 12 touches and 51 yards.
Last week
Yeah, last week.
they were playing Washington.
Yeah,
That's what.
yeah. You know, well, it shows that A-Chain outsnap him. I guess because they just want to just arrest
Right.
rest Marine. Hill says Titan secondary so trash. I can see somebody being disappointed in Mustard performance. Is he? I guess he's saying that most of the fanny production is going to go in the receiving game.
From Hill and Waddle. Yeah. And
Yeah,
two. Yeah.
and I agree with that, and that kind of is a factor I was also alluding to as well. Um, you know, I'm still going to start Mustard if if I don't have anybody on the bench, which most likely you won't have anybody on the bench that's going to be better. I'm trying to think who would. I don't think there were any waiver wire running backs that was even worth picking up, in my opinion. That would produce better.
Zeke if he was out there.
If he was out there in one of my leagues, and somebody should have picked him up. I didn't pick him up because I had McCaffrey and Javonte Williams. I didn't feel like I needed him. If you had Zeke, he definitely his fantasy output he had Thursday night is gonna be way better than Raheem for sure.
Oh,
So
definitely.
I mean, so yeah, that's my sit of the week for running
Well,
backs.
I'll give you an
You know,
example. So I have Mostert in the league. I'm starting him over Brees Hall this week. I'm starting him over Keaton Mitchell. Those are the two that I have on my bench. But I'm starting Mostert.
who was the one before Mitchell? He said,
Brees Hall.
yeah, and Brees Hall's a little banged up too. You know,
Yep.
and the Jets are a predictable offense with that quarterback situation. So I agree with that. Zeke did what Sean think Bijan is going to do. I think, believe it or not, I think Bijan. I think what Zeke finished what 23 fantasy points,
27 in PPR.
27. Yeah, I think Bijan's going to do what Zeke did for sure. Yeah, maybe even better because he like I say, he's going to be my player of the week. Period.
I'm putting him at 20.
20 amongst everybody. Bijan.
Yeah, I'm putting him at 20.
We'll see what happens. We'll come back to that next week for week 15. So wide receivers. We'll get into that now. Who's your star for wide receivers?
I'm going back to the well. Anybody going against the Eagles defense? My start this week is Brandon Cooks.
Oh man, that's mine.
Oh, Brandon Cooks going back to the well. Eagles defense, the secondary is so trash that I think you can throw anybody from Dallas in there. Jake Ferguson, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks. Who else do they have? Turpin. Like just throw anybody in there. They're going to score or they're going to put up 10 fantasy points. So Brandon Cooks is my start this week. I think that this game is going to be high scoring. There's a lot on the line. There's a lot at stake. It's two teams that don't like each other. And frankly, Dallas secondary got lit up last week. And I'm not even trying to be a Dallas hater, but I think that there's going to be a lot of points on the board this week on both sides of the ball. I think you can start the Eagles wide receivers with confidence as well. But Eagles secondary is just so trash. I mean, they are the worst against the pass that Brandon Cooks is an automatic start for me this week.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, Philly gives up nearly 3 touchdowns in the last 3 games. That's second in the league, right behind Washington. They also give up about 24 completions, 7th in the league. And they have been giving up in the last three 270 yards, which is 5th, I believe. Or no, yeah, it's 5th in the league. So, I mean, and you look at what Cooks did to Washington, he had 17.2 fantasy points, 4 receptions, 72 yards, 1 touchdown on 5 targets. Seattle, he only had 45 yards, but he had 1 touchdown. So, I mean, I think it's going to be somewhere in between for Cooks. I can easily see Cooks with 15 fantasy points, 60 yards or something, and I can certainly see a touchdown from Cooks. So like you said, it's going to be what you think the Bills and Chiefs game is going to be like. I think this is going to be like that times 5.
Yeah,
So
I agree. I agree.
so I because I thought that was a good little start. I think it's a sneaky start because Cooks, he had some big games this year. He's been off and on. And if you're going to start Cooks, you definitely started him this week. He's going to be cooking it up on Philly's defense,
He's getting more comfortable with Dak too. He's getting more comfortable in the offense. You can see it, like they're starting to get like just a little bit more in sync and in rhythm. And
Right.
I think like you said, this is the week. If you're going to start Brandon Cooks, you throw him out there this week.
Who would you quarterback wise, who you think is going to have a better game, Hurts or Dak?
That's tough. I think Dak has a better game this week.
I think so too, and I think this might be the game, and this might get Hill all excited here. I think this might be a game where Dak might, you know, catapult himself into being the MVP. And he says Dak easily. Fantasy wise, Hurts might have the better game just from a rushing standpoint.
I was going to say that. I don't think it's like Dak easily. I think it's Hurts is going to get his production, but I think a lot of his production is going to come on the ground, or more of his production is going to come on the ground, which is going to boost his fantasy output. Like Dak is going to have a better game through the air. We all know that.
Correct. Yeah.
But I think you're going to see Hurts probably get into the end zone at some point. Like Hurts getting a rushing TD is almost like guaranteed every week. So I don't think it's Dak easily from a fantasy perspective. Dak may look like the better quarterback in this game, watching the game, but from a fantasy perspective, I think it's going to be pretty even.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that. I mean, I think isn't Hurts still QB1 of the year? I mean, I mean, you always want to start the rushing quarterback in fantasy over the passing quarterback. Period. Unless that passing quarterback is passing to like 4 or 5 touchdowns a game, I'm always starting Hurts. So push or bust.
We got a lot of Philly hate in here. I mean, this is a fantasy show, so I'm gonna be very unbiased. I know some of our viewers aren't as unbiased.
Hey man, it's a rivalry. Should be a good game. I think Dallas and Philly is going to be what we thought San Francisco and Philly was going to be last week. This is going to be actually the game of the year right here. Possibly. We'll see.
I agree. Did you have another wide receiver?
I didn't. I didn't have a backup one. That's okay. Do you have another starter wide receiver you would like to mention?
So I'll just mention a couple. Tyler Lockett. I think if he was to have a game, it would be this game. Somebody that you can put in if you're desperate. And then also, let's go with Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed has been coming on as of late. He's been putting up some strong performances with Jordan Love. I know Christian Watson had a solid game last week, but I think Jaden Reed is becoming one of Jordan Love's favorite targets. And then last but not least is like a sleeper if you need somebody, Parker Washington, Jacksonville with Christian Kirk being out. He had a solid game. I think he had about 7 catches last week. So it'd be interesting to see how he gets more involved into this offense. They're saying that Trevor Lawrence may be back this week. He's questionable, not doubtful, which is kind of surprising after that injury. And the reports were he did look pretty good in practice. So we'll see what happens on Sunday. But Parker Washington looks to be the next man up in that offense, kind of replacing Kirk. You'll probably see more Zay Jones, Calvin Ridley, but I just see Parker Washington in the way that they used him as soon as he came in the game. Like normally you wouldn't give a wide receiver that many targets, but I think he got about 8 targets just out the gate with Christian Kirk being out.
And I didn't even think about Parker Washington. I didn't even look at him after that breakout performance. He was one of the top waiver wire pickups in all 3 of my leagues, maybe if not the top pickup in the waiver wire. And Kurt went on IR, didn't he?
Yeah, he's on IR.
So, I mean, and that's a role to fill. I mean, is Zay Jones playing?
Zay Jones played last week. He didn't do much. Really didn't do much. I think that this offense, we're seeing it's more scheme than it is funnel. Like, we're not going to funnel all the targets to one player. So Calvin Ridley, if you thought Calvin Ridley was going to be the number one wide receiver in this offense, it just hasn't proven to be that point. He's had some solid games, but I think that this offense is more scheme approach, and they look for ways to get the wide receivers out in the open. And Christian Kirk was normally that guy that could get open, kind of either behind the defense or in the middle of the field. Parker Washington looks to be the next guy to kind of fill that wide receiver role for them.
Okay. Would you rather Parker Washington or Jacoby Myers right now?
Jacoby Myers.
For this week, just for this week matchup.
Jacoby Myers.
Jacoby Myers. And I was also going to mention Cortland Sutton. That would be a good start as well versus the Chargers. To go along with your Russell Wilson pick. And also, I want to get into Nico Collins. He's going to be pushed as the wide receiver 1 for Houston now with Tank Dell out for the year. What do you think he does against the Jets?
I don't like the matchup. He could have some success, but I just don't like the matchup going against the Jets. You have Sauce out there, and I don't know who Sauce is going to be covering because they move Nico around a lot. But I think this is more of a Devin Singletary game, Dameon Pierce. They get those guys going on the ground. Brevin Jordan again, I think could have some success. We said last week that we said Dalton Schultz, but Dalton Schultz was ruled out. They utilize a tight end and they attack Denver's secondary through the middle of the field. I think Brevin Jordan had about 6 targets. He only had 3 catches, but he had about 6 targets, which is a significant share of the passing game for a tight end. So Brevin Jordan can have another good game as well.
And we'll get into Brevin Jordan when we get to our tight ends in a sec. But I think that covers the wide receiver starts. As far as sits, and I'll go ahead and go with the sits since we had the same starts. My sit right now is Calvin Ridley and versus the Browns. And you don't know if Trevor's going to play or not. And if he does, I don't see Trevor really doing much, and he's going to be very limited. They're going to be trying to get ETN the ball. Calvin Ridley is an easy target to hone down on if you're the Browns. So it makes sense. If you're struggling for a wide receiver, maybe, if you're desperate for a wide receiver start, I would honestly start Parker Washington over Calvin Ridley. And Calvin Ridley is a guy who has struggled periodically throughout the year. He had his games where he was good, but there's times where, he didn't produce anything. And I think that's going to be one of these games against the Browns, which Browns one of the best defenses in the league. And the Browns get, their backup quarterback back in DTR. So they're not going to be struggling too much offensively when they had Joe Flacco in there, which Joe Flacco, he wasn't half bad for being pulled off the streets but they still ended up losing that game against the Rams. But I think the Browns will come back to life this week, especially defensively. I know Puka had a big game against them, but I don't like Calvin Ridley. I don't like Calvin Ridley versus the Browns. He's my sit of the week. Like I wouldn't start him at all. If you like I said, I would even start Parker Washington over him on the same
Wow.
team. Yeah,
Wow.
Evan Ingram is gonna have the best receiving game against the Browns for the Jaguars. Evan Ingram would be the guy, you know.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there just because we don't know who the quarterback is going to be, and you know, Bether could lean on Evan Ingram a lot more.
Right, and Bedford, I mean, going against the Browns defense, I mean, that's not something you really want either. So, um, yeah, who's your sit?
This was a tough one for me, and I'll tell you, it came down. I'll tell you who it is first, and I'll tell you who it came down between.
Okay,
I'm going with Garrett Wilson. Um, Zach Wilson coming back,
right.
going against Houston. Houston's defense has just been dominant over the last couple of weeks, and I think they're another team that's kind of picking up and gaining momentum, especially on the defensive side. I don't like the matchup for Garrett Wilson. I don't like the matchup for any of the Jets really, but I really don't like it for Garrett Wilson. Could possibly see Derek Stingley as a matchup. That's a tough matchup right there. And Zach Wilson, we just don't see him push the ball down the field too much. It's a lot of short passes. It's a lot of intermediate passes. You may see Garrett Wilson with like 5 for like 25. So not somebody that I'm like running out to like start in my lineup if I have other options. But it came down to between him and Chris Olave. Um, and that was really because one, the quarterback situation in New Orleans. We don't know if it's going to be Derek Carr. We don't know if it's going to be Jameis. They're going against Carolina, who is very stingy against passing offenses. Surprisingly, I think that this
Yeah,
is this is a Kamara game.
it is.
Kamara and Williams. I think that they have a solid production. They're probably going to be running all over Carolina this game. They're probably going to go up, have a nice lead where in the second half they'll be running the ball a whole lot. So,
Well, and I agree with both of those sits there. And Olave's got the flu, but he's still going to play Sunday. My thing is Taysom Hill most likely might not play Sunday. He's pretty banged up. If he does, he's going to be extremely limited. And honestly, if Taysom Hill is limited or does not play, I think that affects the offense in a big way because it seems like when the Saints offense starts to stall out, Taysom is there to bounce him right back up. He's
yeah,
like a energy guy. So, and you speak of Carr, he has really been struggling all year, and he's been struggling with Olave. To be more specific, I think if Jameis start, I think you wouldn't sit Olave, but if Carr starts, you do sit Olave. I
Hmm.
think Jameis would do a whole lot better job of finding Olave just because Jameis is a deep ball guy. Olave, he's very good. Now, Olave can do it all, but he's really good when it comes down deep in the field because of his speed. He can beat a lot of corners in his league. And I think if a Jameis start, then you need to go hop back on the Olave bandwagon. But if he doesn't, Carr starts, then I agree. I don't like Olave either.
yeah,
And it will be a big Kamara game. I can see Kamara having over 10 receptions for sure. I mean, I think that's going to be if I had to choose the over and under on that 10 receptions, I might choose the over on that, which might sound crazy, but I mean, I think we had a game with Kamara having what 16 receptions, 17 receptions. I mean, I think it's very possible that may happen. And
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
as far as the Saints beating the Panthers and getting an early lead, I don't know, man. I think the Panthers might get their second win this season. I think,
Wow.
yeah, I think it might be a close game.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
yep. As far as sits, I think you had any more sits for wide receivers?
No more.
I didn't have any. Tight ends. So we spoke about my tight end start a couple minutes ago. Who's your tight end start?
My tight end start is Gerald Everett going against Denver. I'm going back to the well against Denver. We called out with Houston last week.
We did.
Dalton Schultz, Brevin Jordan. I think Gerald Everett has been okay in the production department for the Chargers. He seems to be somebody that Justin Herbert trusts. I think this is a game where they are going to attack the middle of the defense again, and you'll see Gerald Everett get involved. Quentin Johnson has kind of come on as that number 2 receiver, but it's not as consistent as you would like for it to be. We're just not seeing that offense take off outside of anybody but maybe Keenan Allen. So I think if there's a week where you need a tight end, if you're like on the fence of trying to get into the playoffs and your tight end spot is weak, if Gerald Everett is out there, I say why not? Denver is like bottom 5 against tight ends over
I
the
was about to
season.
say that. Yep.
So, I think that this is a good week to throw Gerald Everett out there.
Yeah, I believe they're like top 3 in giving up the most receptions, touchdowns, and targets to tight ends this year.
Yeah.
So, and honestly, the Chargers do not have a red zone option receiver wise. I mean, Keenan Allen is a red zone option, but if you're looking to, looking for like a size mismatch, Jarrett Everett is their best option. They don't have, I don't think, their backup tight end Perham. I think he's still hurt, isn't he?
Yeah.
So I mean, he's normally their red zone target in the normally on the goal line because he's like 6'8". But
Yeah.
Jared Everett, I think he's like 6'4", 6'5". So he's easily there. And you figured Quentin Johnson would be that guy, but obviously he hasn't. So I think you definitely get at least one touchdown out of Everett, and in one touchdown, like 10 points or something of that nature, or 6 points. I don't know.
I'm taking the over on 10 for Gerald Everett this week.
I think that's a good bet. I think it's a good bet, and I think considering Denver being bottom 5 against tight ends, it's a very good bet. My tight end start, we just spoke about him a couple of minutes ago. I'm picking Brevin Jordan, man. He had a good game last week against Denver, 3 receptions, 64 yards. The Jets, they give up the second most touchdowns. If I'm reading that right, second most touchdowns given up against tight ends, if I'm not mistaken, and they give up about 7 targets to tight ends this year. So I think Jordan will get at least 7 to 8 targets, and I think he'll at least he'll receive at least half of those. And I think he'll have a good game against the Jets, considering I'm sure the Jets are going to be looking in on Nico. I believe Noah Brown comes back and fully healthy. I don't think he'll have a big game either. So they're going to have to go to somebody. And C.J. Stroud, he's pretty good at targeting the tight end. Schultz, when he was healthy, had a couple big games. So I like Brevin Jordan this week. And like I said, they got to pass it to somebody, and I think it's going to be a game where the Jets are going to obviously lose. And C.J. Stroud is going to officially overcome that defense because that defense has to get tired at some point of being on the field, So I would imagine the time of possession for the Jets defense got to be top 5 in the league. Got to be,
Yeah.
So
They are on the field a lot.
yeah.
Throughout the
So I
course of
mean,
the season.
which tells you how good that defense is, considering how much yardage they give up. They don't give up very much.
Right.
but they're always on the field. But the Texas offense is just too good. C.J. Stroud is too good. Isn't C.J. Stroud banged up though?
Yeah, not anything that gives me concern. I think he
So
practiced all week.
well, there you go. And there's no way they're going to be able to contain C.J. Stroud for the entire game. There's no way, unless Zach Wilson finds his mojo and pulls something out of his ass. I don't. It's going to be a C.J. Stroud performance, not like some of the ones he had, but he's not going to have a bad performance. You know,
Yeah,
so
I agree. I agree.
that's why I like Belvin Jordan this week. As far as sits, for some reason I misread the schedule. I was going to say Trey McBride, but I think the Cardinals have a bye this week.
They're on bye this week.
I was looking at week 15 for Trey McBride for some reason, which he might be my sit for next week. Who's your sit at tight end?
I'm going with Dallas Goedert. Just going up against. I know it's tempting.
He's coming back. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just coming back. You may not have a lot of options out there, but I would just be a little bit more patient with Goddard. And this is a week where I would kind of not put him in my lineup if I had somebody else that I could put in there, just to see how he looks coming back from that injury. And he came back pretty fast too. I think it's only been about 3 weeks. So, that's he's coming back from a fractured arm. So it's a little too quick for me. And going against Dallas as well, I just don't know if he's going to have a great game. So I would just kind of proceed with caution with Dallas Goedert this week.
Yeah, and I think that's a safe sit because, regardless, coming off an injury, you're just now coming back. It's going to take time for him to get adjusted and get back into the rhythm. So I definitely don't think if he's on your waiver wire, definitely pick him up if he is, because he'll eventually get back into it. And I think maybe that's what the Eagles need is a tight end right now. So he'll eventually get back to it, but this week is probably not the week to start him. But that doesn't mean the other receiving options for Philly's gonna struggle, which they won't. So yeah, I would definitely sit Dallas Goedert as well. I'm trying to figure out who I would sit since I accidentally chose Trey McBride.
It's not a lot out there this week because you're starting Kelsey.
It's not.
You're starting Hawkinson. You're starting Kittle. You're starting Laporta. Evan Ingram is the only one that gives me a little bit of pause. You're starting Ferguson. Kincaid. Komet. I'm starting Komet if he's on my lineup. And Njoku. The quarterback situation there gives me pause. It's such a toss up with tight ends. It's like once you get past like that top 5, it gets real ugly.
Well, I would sit Kyle Pitts. Going against Tampa, they got athletic linebackers. I think it's going to be a rushing game for Atlanta. I don't know the last 3 weeks Kyle Pitts has been doing. Let me look right here.
I would start Kyle Pitts this week.
You would start Kyle Pitts?
Yeah. It's not like
go ahead.
With Kyle Pitts, it's not I have to start Kyle Pitts. But if I have him, the matchup with Tampa doesn't scare me. Tampa's bottom 10 against tight ends. I think Atlanta has a little bit more success in the air than they normally have against Tampa. Tampa's secondary is bad. Really, their front 7 their front 5 is pretty stout up front. Their defensive line is good against the run. That's why I have a little bit of tempered expectations for Bijan Robinson. That's why I say when you say 30, I'm going, okay, maybe 20. he's
Right.
going to get his work through the air. Like he's going to get his passing yards and all that. But I think they're not going to have as much success running up the middle. And if there was anybody, I mean, Kyle Pitts, why not?
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at it like he only has one touchdown of the whole entire season, and that came against Washington. Last time he played against Tampa, it was only 3 reception, 47 yards. I mean, I don't know. I would almost pick Drake London to have a way better game than Kyle Pitts. He's
I
listed
think Drake
here.
London has a great game, but I'm
Yeah,
just saying
I
from a tight end perspective, like tight ends don't produce much. So if you're looking for somebody, you need somebody, and you're looking at a matchup, I think this is a good matchup for Kyle Pitts.
I think you got a point there. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, because you're right. Because there's not much production from tight ends, anyways. They really take a deep dive into it. It's you're really looking at the top 5, top 6 tight ends.
Right.
And that's why I thought Trey McBride would have been a good sit if they were actually playing the 49ers this week, because Trey McBride had a good week last week.
Yeah.
Kyler really likes him, but I'll say that for next week. He'll be my sit for next week. So we already disclosed one sit for next
Don't
week.
don't give the people too much.
But yeah, we go into defenses here. Who's your start for defenses?
Green Bay, lock,
Green Bay. Oh,
lock,
lock.
lock. Green Bay,
Well, who's Green Bay playing again? The Giants.
Giants.
Yeah. You don't think Tommy DeVito is going to have a good game against the Packers?
No.
um, I think it could be a Saquon Barkley game.
No.
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 So you don't like any Giants this week?
No.
Wow. It says
Green Bay.
here.
Green Bay is my lock on defense this week.
If you had to pick Green Bay or the Texans defense, who you picking?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I'm starting both of them. I'm slightly leaning towards Green Bay. I like the Texans. I think the Texans are a strong play. Anybody playing a New York team this week, you just throw them in your lineup. Like I think Houston's going to have a big game, but I like Green Bay's defense going against the Giants as well.
Well, the Texans are my start of the week for defense and special teams. I mean, they're going against the Jets. The Texans, they're only 13th in takeaways, but the Jets do give up. In the last 3, they give up 3 turnovers a game. I think Zach Wilson only started for one of those games. I know the last 2 have been Tim Boyle, Trevor Siemian, but yeah, the last 3 games the Jets have given up 3 turnovers. The Houston is in 9th in opponent completion, meaning they don't let too many completions happen. They only give up 2 touchdowns per game, 1 rushing, 1 passing. That's in the last 3 games. And I don't think – I mean, the Jets would be lucky to get even 1 touchdown.
I
So,
agree.
yeah, I mean – so I'm going Texas defense.
We lost Sean. So Texans defense was Sean's pick. For sits on defense, I'm going with Kansas City this week. Kansas City's defense has been pretty good for most of the year. They've been not as consistent over the last couple of games. So I'm going with Kansas City as a sit. And I don't think we're going to get Sean back. So, there he is.
My bad.
You're back. Okay.
See,
I was just giving my sit of the week, which was Kansas City.
that's my sit of the week.
Okay.
So we're thinking on the same page.
We agree.
Yeah. Well, their safety Brian Cook he's hurt now, so it seems to appear that may have some effect on the Kansas City defense. I know Kansas City has been one of the better defenses in the league, especially passing defense, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't like the Chiefs defense. Like I said earlier, I think the Bills are going to be desperate and they're going to do whatever they can to win the game because they're trying to make the playoffs. So I agree with you. I have the Chiefs defense as well as my sit.
Yep.
As far as you have any other defenses that the highlight?
Jacksonville potentially going against Cleveland. Joe Flacco is a statue, and you put him behind there going against Josh Allen. Give me Jacksonville as a start. I do like Tampa this week. If you need somebody, I think Tampa is a potential start going against Atlanta. Just because we know Desmond Ridder is turnover prone. They don't really push the ball down the field through the air like that, although we think that the wide receivers, Kyle Pitts, may have some success. I still think Tampa puts up enough points to have a solid week this week on defense.
So I got a good one right here for you. Considering what the Rams were able to do against the Browns last week, what do you think about the Ravens? And I know it's at Baltimore, and that's going to be a tough one for the Rams. And it's going to be a tough one for Puka and Cooper and all the Rams. But I don't know. And considering what the Rams were able to do against the Browns last week, what do you think about the Ravens defense? Even though they're just as good.
I'm starting the Ravens.
You're starting the Ravens?
Yeah.
If you had to choose between the Dolphins and Ravens, who would you choose? I'm picking the Dolphins.
Ooh, I'm picking the Dolphins.
Yeah, a better matchup. Okay, let's say, would you pick Ravens or Saints defense?
Going with the Saints.
Oh, I don't see that. That's where I kind of get mixed up because I can see that the Saints, I think they're on a downward spiral, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a fan and I'm frustrated, but it's just like I watch the team every week, and the Saints defense continue to get worse and worse. I think it might be a big game for Miles Sanders and Chuba, maybe one of those two. I don't know, man. I'm telling you, and Tommy Trimble. He's gonna get a red zone touchdown if he's active. One of them tight ends. I know Hurst is no longer playing, but Tommy Trimble or In Thomas, he's gonna get one of them two are gonna get a red zone touchdown. I'm telling you.
You're coming off as like a frustrated fan right now. I'm gonna give the Saints a little bit more credit than that. If they're going against Carolina, I'm not sold on Carolina at all. I would put any defense against Carolina. And part of the reasons why I have Tampa on one of my teams is because they played Carolina last week. So
right.
I was like, okay, they go against Atlanta this week. I'm just going to keep them. So, I just don't trust Carolina. I don't trust Bryce right now at this point of his career. I don't trust any of the receivers. The running game is running behind a terrible offensive line. Saints are playing for something. Saints are still trying to play for the division. So, give me the Saints defense.
Let me ask you, this is kind of a side question. Bryce Young, I drafted him in Dynasty. What do you suggest me doing with him? Do I keep him after the season to continue to keep him after the season, or do I look to trade him? Because I did get a trade offer before the trade deadline. I didn't go through with it. I decided to keep him. But, depending on who their new coach might be, would you trade or keep him?
I would trade him. Yeah, and my only reason for that is because it's not Bryce Young. I don't trust that front office to put any help around him. It's not a competent front office. They don't know how to build a team. They had opportunities to trade Brian Burns. Why are you holding on to Brian Burns at the trade deadline?
Right.
Your team's not going anywhere. Get the picks so that you can build your offensive and defensive line and get him the help that he needs. I just don't see any competency in that front office that gives me confidence that Bryce Young is going to be a star in this league going forward. It's going to wind up being a bad situation for him, where I think he's going to look bad because they didn't give him the help that he needs. You're going to be in another like Justin Fields situation. Like that's where it's headed right now. And I think he's going to need an opportunity to go somewhere else. And I hope that it's not as a backup, but he may have to go back up somebody after his contract is over with Carolina and then wind up, somebody gets hurt or he slides into a starting role somewhere and, by being a backup. So I think he's going to be an okay quarterback. He's undersized, and you have to find ways to utilize him while, with him being undersized. So just don't think the front office or the coaches have done a good job with him in his rookie season. So I will look to move off of him and see what you can get if you're in a dynasty league, because I just don't see a path forward right now unless they start making some serious moves in the offseason. You also have to remember, they don't have a first-round pick.
Yeah, I was about to say that. They don't even
So
have
who
a
are they
first-round
getting?
pick.
And that's my point is, if you don't have a first-round pick, your team stinks. You're not getting anybody in the draft in the first round. Why not move off of some players that have some value to get some picks and maybe get some free agents in the building in the offseason? They didn't go that route, so I just don't see anything happening there.
Yeah, I just certainly agree to that, and I'm just gonna wait and see what they do in the offseason and what it mainly depends on the coach for me. What coach they get, because obviously they're gonna have to get an offensive coach. It's gonna be somebody young. I don't know who that's gonna be. Maybe Ben Johnson from Detroit, or the Frank Smith from Miami, or even Eric Bieniemy. We'll see. I might use that as the advantage, because they're going to have to go to free agency to get weapons for Bryce Young, and they're going to have to outbid everyone. And I don't know what their salary cap situation looks like. Like you just said, they should have traded Brian Burns to get some picks. Yeah, I mean, it's not looking good for Bryce Young. I didn't draft him early. I want to say it was like a 6 or 7 round pick, which, it was good value when you're looking at for dynasty, correct.
Yeah.
And I wish I would have picked CJ Stroud. I wish I would have picked CJ Stroud.
I think that's what everybody's saying. That's what Carolina's saying too.
Well, when you think about it, considering with the lack of weapons they got around Bryce, who's to say that CJ Stroud wouldn't be in Bryce Young's position if they would have picked CJ Stroud? I don't know.
Well, in the beginning of the season, when you looked at CJ Stroud's weapons and Bryce Young's weapons, we thought that they were comparable.
Right.
Thielen, Shark, Mingo, and then on CJ's side, you had Nico Collins, who, okay, Robert Woods, Tank Dell was kind of the unknown. It was like we didn't know that Tank Dell was going to be Tank Dell in the beginning of the season. So it's like when we looked at both of their weapons, their offense, it was like, well, they both might be bad,
You got a good point, and yeah, I mean, maybe the difference is the coaching, and you never know. So we'll see what happens, and yeah, there's no crying in fantasy. Hopefully, everybody uses our knowledge to win their games, to get into playoffs, or to win their playoff games.
I just want to say we've been hitting on our picks. There's no denying that we've been hitting on our picks.
I feel like we have at least hit on more than half our picks, in my opinion.
So if you're not listening to us or you're not watching the show, that's on you. But there's no crying in fantasy.
There's no crying in fantasy. All right. All
right, Sean. See you next week, week 15, playoffs. Let's go.
Good luck to everybody. All right. See you later. All right.